Okay, now let's move further, and I give the floor to Professor Leonid Polischuk. The floor is yours.
Good morning. I'm very pleased to present here some of the projects of the Laboratory of Applied Studies of Institutions and Social Capital, which is a part of the Center of Institutional Studies. In this lab, we deal with formal and informal institutions. Informal institutions being norms, values, attitudes, and so forth, summarily known as social capital. What I would like to do is first to give you a snapshot of our project portfolio and very briefly touch upon several of our projects so that you have an idea as to what we do and how we do it. And then secondly, I would like to spend more time on one particular project, and that is the project on institutions and visa barriers. All of the projects that I'm going to talk about are on this slide. So the first one is on institutions and allocation of talent. We've been working on this for quite some time, but it's now a new data set. Another one is on comparative institutions, where we try to reevaluate the so-called Refusal in the Russian environment. The third one is what we think is a new way to measure corruption by looking, surprise, surprise, at Russian license plates. In the fourth one, we try to discover historical origins of social capital, and we look at the Second World War event. And finally, I'm going to talk about how the quality of institutions affect visa regimes. So let me first, I'm very briefly talk about the first of the above-mentioned projects, which is on institutions and allocation of talent. And as we all know, institutions matter for the allocation of talent. And the common story is that good institutions, strong institutions, increase rewards to productive activities, whereby poor institutions increase rewards and returns to unproductive activities, aka rent-seeking. And therefore we should expect that institutional quality affects the allocation of talent in society. And furthermore, we have reasons to believe that the allocation of top talents is particularly sensitive to the institutional quality. And to test this hypothesis, ideally you need a data set whereby, on the one hand, you have good measures of talent, and on the other hand, these talents are being applied in variable institutional setups. And Russia is an excellent environment for such empirical analysis, because institutional quality exhibits profound variations across the country on the one hand, and on the other hand, when we talk about university applicants, we have reasonably good measures of their talent, which are the results of their unified YEGA. What is YEGA in English? I have no idea, but this is standardized aptitude test that every Russian high school graduate has to pass if he or she wants to be enrolled in the university. And since I don't have much time, I'll show just one regression which shows that Russian applicants are more likely to choose education in engineering if institutions are strong, and the quality of institutions is measured by the investment risk. And also the talent of such applicants adverse affects the likelihood that they will choose engineering, because the overall quality of institutions in Russia is poor. On the other hand, when we talk about areas of activities which are commonly affiliated with rent-seeking, such as loan public administration, then we see that this is where people with high scores are drawn. And also, they do it more so if the institutional quality is poor. Particular interest for us is the interaction between YEGA score and investment risk. And we show that it's less and less likely that top talents will go into engineering as the institutional quality declines, and it's more and more likely that top talents go to law and public administration as institutional quality declines. It's that much that I can talk about this project for a lack of time. Another one which I want to mention very briefly is on comparative institutions. This is what we call Refusal revisited. Hernando de Soto famously argued for a large number of years that land ownership improves prospects of business activities. for a number of reasons. The most powerful one is that if you are a formal landowner, you can pledge your land as a collateral, and that improves your access to finance. So institutional ownership, land ownership, that is, from that point of view, improves your prospects for doing business. But we argue that when institutions are poor, there are liabilities which are involved with land ownership. For example, because a firm that owns its land becomes more attractive, and as a result, more susceptible to hostile activities, hostile takeovers, so on and so forth. And therefore, institutional quality serves as a sorting factor which affects the cost-benefit balance of land ownership in the Russian industrial sector. And we can assume that if institutions are particularly poor, then that would eat away all of the these sort of benefits of land ownership. And as a result, industrial firms that own land end up being worse off than those that lease land on hard and capital land use regimes. And a regression we show here demonstrates that indeed the interaction between land ownership and institutional quality, and we use different measures of institutional quality. In that particular case, is the size of the informal sector in the region. It has the predicted sign and it is strongly significant. That is, if a firm owns land, then the deterioration of institutional quality makes this firm less and less effective and successful economically. License plates and corruption measurement. Now, as all Russians know, some combinations of numbers and letters are preferred by Russian motorists for unknown reasons. The official procedure of allocating license plates is that you get these plates in a certain order, which is just random, I would say. And therefore, you would not see any correlations between, say, type of an automobile and the allocation of license plates. In fact, we do observe such correlation. We observe that what is known as nice license plates, красивые номера, in Russia are much more often found among expensive automobiles, which is certainly an evidence of corruption. And we can use data of that kind to measure corruption, and this is what we do in this project. Abnormal concentration of nice license plates among expensive cars is an objective evidence. It's a smoking gun of corruption, and could be used for corruption measurement. And this is just an illustration of what we see. We see that the incidence of nice license plates among Bentleys, Infiniti, Lexus, and so forth is way higher than it is among Lada and Renault. The remaining project, which I would like to mention very quickly before we talk more about the visa project, is an attempt to find out how historic events affect norms and values of the current of the modern society, so the current Russian population. We have reasons to believe that participation in the Second World War by Soviet and Russian war veterans had somewhat unpredictably a liberating impact on the veterans. It had enhanced their dignity, individual and collective self-confidence, civic culture, and social capital. And we argue that such value shift is still tangible and visible among veterans' descendants, to whom their fathers and grandfathers have passed their war experience, their war-caused values through intergenerational value transmission. And this is just one of our regressions. We use survey data to prove that. And we see that respondents' sense of responsibility for our community, for district where they live, their beliefs that states should support civic participation, so on and so forth, is significantly higher for descendants of war veterans, especially those who survived the war. Well, otherwise there wouldn't be any descendants, of course, and for those who were close to the respondent when the respondent grew up. And in our placebos, we see no such effect. Finally, the project I would like to talk a little bit more about, and this is about institutions and visa regimes. Visas are a fascinating topic of study, and there are counteracting trends in the world. On the one hand, we see a reduction of visa barriers between some countries, and Schengen is perhaps the most prominent example of this trend. On the other hand, we see an increase in visa barriers, Fortress Europe, all around the West, so on and so forth. And that obviously reflects receiving countries' perception of various risks of admission of other countries' nationals. And concerns are about illegal migration, employment, crime, terrorism, so on and so forth. Now, we all know that institutions matter for pretty much everything. Visa regimes reflect complicated public choices made in the receiving countries because different groups have different preferences and attitudes over visa regimes. And we would like to see if institutions affect these choices. Institutions, formal and informal, formal institutions of social capital explain a plethora of social, economic, and political outcomes. So let's see if they explain visa regimes as well. And primarily, is it true that if you improve institutions, then visa regimes become more favorable for a given country? If there is an improvement in the regulatory quality, it doesn't mean that it will be easier for these countries' nationals to travel abroad. If you strengthen the rule of law, does it mean that it'll be easier to travel to other countries? Now, we are certainly not the first to try to explain the variations of visa regimes, and there is a large literature on that matter. Surprisingly, this literature nearly ignores the institutional quality, but it points out a number of factors which do affect the height of visa barriers. Predictably, GDP per capita matters, and all else equal, if you live in a wealthy country, it will be easier for you to get a visa, or it will be more likely that it wouldn't be required to have a visa if you want to travel abroad. Distance between countries surprisingly matters. If you live further away from your destination country, visa barriers will be lower because distance is a barrier to a certain extent. Tourism and business ties have a predicted sign. Risks of political instability in the sending country are high barriers. The risks of terrorism and conflicts in the sending country, quite obviously, high barriers. Now, let's get to the institutions. Is it true that better institutions will lower barriers? You can expect that probably yes, simply because if you have good institutions in your home country, that creates an enabling environment for living and conducting business in the country. And all that's equal, it would make it less appealing for people to try to immigrate, let alone immigrate illegally. Secondly, good institutions enhance the culture of compliance with rules. And therefore, people who live in a country with good institutions develop a higher respect of official rules, law, and so on and so forth. And it makes it less likely to violate such rules and laws abroad and with the views of liberal visa regimes in destination countries. On the other hand, one can argue that better institutions could also make visa barriers higher. And how come? Well, strong institutions restrict crime, violence, rent-seeking, and other forms of questionable, unlawful behavior in the home country. So if such institutions get stronger and better enforced in the home country, and if there is a certain number of so-called bad guys, quotation marks, in the home country, they will have less opportunities to seek illicit gains where they live, and they will be more likely to look abroad for that. So they'll have a spillover effect of institutional strengthening. Finally, the role of informal institutions. Informal institutions such as norms, values, morale, trustworthiness. A large number of studies show that migrants bring their norms from their home countries and keep them for a long period of time. And therefore, you can expect that if people come from a country where moral standards are high, where there is a culture of compliance of law, where people think that it's a bad thing to be engaged in bad behavior, it's less likely that such people would violate visa rules and laws and regulations in the destination country, and that would probably lower visa barriers for citizens of such countries traveling abroad. What you can also expect is that formal institutions and social capital can complement each other. In fact, it is shown that they do on a large number of cases, but in this case we can also expect some complementarity. If it is indeed true that when you strengthen the rule of law, that would cause the spillover effect, and therefore the visa barriers would rise, you would expect that the spillover effect would be stronger, all else equal, if there is a large number of people with low moral standards, and therefore social capital and formal institutions would complement each other. Let me very briefly present you a simple model that makes such an intuition more precise. We distinguish between two types of institutions. One is institution services, and those institutions improve productivity. And if someone is engaged in productive activity, an improvement of this institutional quality will produce higher returns to such person. There are also institutions rules. unlike institutional services, they restrict unlawful and/or unproductive behavior, such as rent seeking, and therefore people who are engaged in productive activities are more secure to keep the results of their efforts if institutions' rules get stronger. Informal institutions, as I said before, is about norms and values, and we assume that there is a certain percentage, just to keep things simple. It's possible to modify this model to make more natural assumptions about how informal institutions are measured, but let's assume that there is a share of population which is normalized to unity, which have idiosyncratic aversion to rent seeking and unlawful activities, even if such activities offer higher return. And the rest of the population are ethically blind, and their choices of activities are driven entirely by material gains. Now, there are three types of activities. The first one is when people are engaged in productive activities at home. The second one is if people are engaged in rent seeking at home. And the third one, if people are trying to be engaged in rent seeking abroad, in which case they will have to travel somewhere else and get a visa. And the continuum of agency is distributed among these three activities. We assume that people are different in their relocation cost. And therefore, when you contemplate moving abroad, then you should factor in that relocation cost as well. At the bottom of the slide, you see payoffs to different activities: productive behavior, domestic rent seeking, foreign rent seeking. As always in such models, we're interested in equilibrium, and again, as is often the case in such models, equilibria are driven by the ratio of those engaged in productive behavior to domestic rent seeking. This is how an equilibrium looks like. It can be easily shown that it exists and is unique. And now we do comparative statics, which is the main purpose of developing such a model. And this comparative statics would lead us to the testability of both of these. Now, the equilibrium value, the equilibrium size of domestic rent seeking decreases in institution rules quality, which is predictable. It increases in the institution services quality because institution services quality makes the domestic economy more productive and then more appealing for domestic rent seeking. Our primary interest is in the equilibrium level of those who want to get engaged in questionable activities abroad, which is R2. It increases in the quality of institutions' roles because of the spillover effect that I just mentioned. It decreases in the quality of institution services simply because, as I said, institution services make the alternative available to rent seekers, which is stay at home, more productive. And therefore, we can expect that strengthening of domestic rule of law increases the number of visa applicants who intend to violate the law of the receiving country. And we can also expect that this effect will be pronounced for lower stocks of domestic social capital. At the same time, we have reasons to believe that improvement of domestic institution services decreases the number of ill-intended applicants because they're comfortable to do what they want to do back home. Before I run with the model, another couple of slides, we need to think how all of that translates into visa application process. And we assume that there is a certain population, percentage of the population who want to travel abroad for legitimate purposes and apply for visas. And of course, all R2 applicants are illegitimate. So we calculate the percentage of the visa applicants which want to pursue illegitimate goals in their country of destination. Now, if you think about how visa process works, so there is a consular official who treats an application, and she probably looks in an application file for some signs of inadmissibility. And such signs would be a signal for her to have a better look at the applicant and the file, and probably to reject the application. We assume that the signals of inadmissibility are random, but they're more likely to occur in the case when an applicant is indeed someone who wants to violate the visa rules. And we assume that there is a likelihood ratio which monotonically increases in the sign of inadmissibility. So the higher is that sign, the more likely it is that the applicant is inadmissible. Now, the consular decision is that the a posteriori probability that an applicant is an illegitimate one exceeds a certain threshold. And as it is often the case in such signaling games, the decision depends not just on the signal itself, but also on the perception of the consular officer as to how likely is it that a person from a given country intends to violate visa rules. So the same signal could lead to a rejection of a visa visa application, denial of visa if there is a perception that a large number of potential applicants are violators, or admission of that person if it is assumed that it's very unlikely a priori that an applicant would like to violate the visa rules. And that leads finally to what we were looking for, that is to a comparative statics of the probability of visa refusal, which increases in the quality of institutions' rules and decreases in the quality of institution services. And that leads us to our hypothesis, and those are that visa barriers, and I'm going to talk in a second as to how we measure visa barriers, rise in the quality of domestic institutions' rules and decline in the quality of domestic institution services. And we should also expect that visa barriers decline in the stock of domestic social capital, norms and values, and we also should expect some interaction between the two, some complementarity between social capital and visa regimes. How we test all of this? We have several databases, and I'm going to show mainly what we have at one of them, and very briefly what we have from the other, and these are not the only ones. Surprisingly, there are many sources of information of visa regimes. Our main source is the so-called European Visa Database, which registers annual visa refusal rates by all Schengen countries of the world, by all countries of the Schengen area, for applicants from any other country of the world. Of course, there are some gaps in that database, but for example, we know what was the refusal rate in 2008 for applicants from Costa Rica seeking a visa, say, to Belgium. So we use this data set. And that actually creates a sort of three-dimensional panel, because one dimension of that panel is time, another dimension of that panel is destination country. Of course, we'll look at origin country. If there is a visa-free regime, then visa refusal rate, of course, is zero. Now, our dependent variable is the average for the period refusal rate for a non-Schengen country by a Schengen country, of course, and there should be two different rules. First of all, let me show you some data. This is the distribution of Schengen refusal rates for countries of the world. And in the case of Russia, actually, it's quite low. So Russians are welcoming Europe. This is a good sign. It's one of the most welcome countries to Schengen. But for some other countries, less fortunate for a number of reasons, this is not the case. Just for information, this is how it looks like for the US. And the refusal rate, Americans are tighter in processing visa applications, and British are even worse. I don't show that here. And again, Russia is something like 10%, but this is what the US Embassy in US Consul in Moscow maintain telling us all along. What kind of data on institutions we have? Of course, we use standard institutional measures, indexes of governance matter, project, rule of law, corruption prevention, and these are our proxies for institutions' rules. And government effectiveness and regulatory quality, these are our proxies for institutional quality. Institution services. Property rights is another example of institution rules. Our measures of informal institutions are drawn from world weather surveys, and we use all 5 bases of this survey. We measure trust, which is common, and we also measure ethical norms, where people ask whether it's appropriate to, in their possible flaw, doable, whatever, tolerate, whether it can be tolerated when people are engaged in different forms of questionable behavior, such as taking bribes, cheating on taxes, so on and so forth. Is it important to help people and behave properly? Controls are essentially the variables which are shown in previous literature to affect visa regimes, and those are here. Now, I will show you a few regressions, and then I guess I'm done. Let's talk first about the impact of formal institutions. And as the next table will show, institutions' rules and institution services indeed have the predicted signs for visa barriers, and this is very robust. They're highly statistically significant. This is what we have. First, we have a set of controls, and they have expected signs. Please have a look at the rule of law. Rule of law, an increase in the rule of law makes visa barriers higher. And it's very highly statistically significant. It's also significant economically. One standard deviation increase in the rule of law makes visa barriers high by about 1/4 or 1/3 of the standard deviation. So this is institution rule. How about institution services? Government effectiveness is definitely an institution service. And here the effect is negative, as our theory predicts, and also highly significant. Control of corruption is an institution rule. Positive, significant. Regulatory quality, institution service, negative, and significant. Social capital, we have measures of trust here, and there's a little bit of confusion as to how you measure, but you see that the measure of distrust, which is a binary variable, it enhances, it rises the visa barriers predictably, and the measure of trust makes these barriers lower. And finally, about the interaction between these variables, we have reasons to believe that the impact of institution rules on the visa barriers that we expect to be negative goes stronger when there is a decline in social capital. And the second half of this table shows exactly that. And again, all the interactions come out highly statistically significant. So we can conclude by saying that countries with lower trust and higher propensity for opportunistic behavior, they face ceteris paribus higher visa barriers. A low level of social capital make visa barriers more sensitive to the conditions of domestic institutions' rules. And the full marginal effect, inclusive of the interaction with social capital of strengthening the rule of law to visa barriers, is negative and significant, but this is for sufficiently immoral countries. Let me show you another specification. We did some robustness checks and I told you there are other measures of visa regimes. This is the so-called Henley and Partners Visa Restriction Index, also known as the Index of Passport Power. It shows to how many countries in the world a holder of a certain country's passport can travel without a visa. So top is close to 170, and I believe Finnish passport is the most powerful worldwide. And then the power of passports decline progressively, as you see. Russia is still about the median, so it's okay to have a Russian passport. But what if we try to explain these variations of the passport power by, for simplicity's sake, on institutions, let's leave aside social capital, we see the same results. We see that the rule of law surprisingly makes your passport less powerful, but regulatory quality makes it more powerful. Quality of governance, corruption prevention, I should say, less powerful. Government effectiveness, more powerful. Conclusions. Formal and informal institutions matter for visa barriers, although in different and sometimes counterintuitive ways. Formal and informal institutions complement each other as factors of visa barriers. Improvement of institution services, such as government effectiveness, lowers the barriers. Improvement of institutions' rules, in fact, somewhat unexpectedly, could make barriers higher. But this is only if there is a lack of morality and other traits in the sending country. Thanks.
Okay, now it's time for question. Yes.
Maybe I missed something. Did you work only with all kinds of visas, or did you select separate working visas?
Oh, no, we didn't touch on working visas. We dealt only, and this is what the databases are about, only with visitor visas. Someone who travels to another country purportedly for the purposes of tourism, leisure, whatnot, some business activities, but we did not include working visas, we didn't include student visas, and quite obviously we did not include immigrant visas.
It would be interesting to look at the working visas and also the situation with age level of the country, something like that.
I agree, thanks. This is a good point. There might be some other control variables that you can include, such as, for example, the attitude to migrants in receiving countries, and perhaps the size of ethnic communities in receiving countries as well, which you could expect if there is a big community of a certain ethnicity in a country, say Sweden, then all else equal, it might be a bit more difficult for an applicant of the same ethnic group to get a visa, because there would be an assumption that it will be likely that that person will stay in that country because there will be people around to help him or her. But we do include receiving country fixed effects in our panel, and those probably include much of these factors.
Yes.
So suppose the country has very strict visa requirements, and so all the groups don't apply. So they apply to easy countries, and then there will be a high rejection rate. So actually a high rejection rate may mean lower barriers.
Yes, that is true, and I agree that in people's choices as to where to go, they could strategically select countries to where they go. But I guess we should be safe about that because we're looking for visa applicants to Schengen. And indeed, countries in Schengen, they differ from each other in their toughness of visa application rules. Belgium is notorious as being particularly tough. But there is a chance to perhaps use some other countries, although that might cause some problems when they cross the borders, some people might know. But because we aggregate all visa information for all of the Schengen countries, include all of them in our panel, I guess we should be fine. But your remark is a valid one, and we should think about that.
Oral, please.
I have a question about your research of the influence of veterans, World War II veterans and their descendants. Basically, what I would be interested in seeing, basically any war builds the character the same way of the veterans, but in Russia, World War II is singled out as the only noble war, and all other veterans are not considered heroes or very respected. So I would just be interested in seeing whether veterans of other wars gave something to their children that they should build their character.
Well, it would be indeed very interesting to compare the experience of war veterans in different countries of the world, and that will certainly depend on the war. That will certainly depend on the outcome of the war. Many wars, in fact, cause very heavy moral traumas, known as post-traumatic stress disorder. Many wars carry stigmas, especially if the war is perceived as being an unjust one and lost one, as it was the case in Nazi Germany and post-Nazi Germany. So Russia is different from that point of view because the war was widely and still is being perceived as a just, as a great, patriotic, so on and so forth, and because last but not least it was a one war, they came back victorious. But this is not the only reason as to why the war has cultivated these attitudes. Historical literature explains there might be others, and one is that the war has had a liberating impact on people simply because their life before the war was a life in a very strictly controlled environment. It was a barrack room life before and during the war. But in the barrack room life during the war, in fact, people have greater autonomy, greater discretion, greater flexibility, especially in the early period of the war when the chain of command collapsed. And it was up to you to die or be independent on you, and that cultivated that sense of personal autonomy, personal dignity, personal freedom and liberation. And on that count, not to mention others, the Great Patriotic War was perhaps different from other wars.
Yes, what do you have?
Thank you for this interesting presentation. So my question is about the last project you presented. I wonder if it's actually possible to bring in at least some descriptive evidence from countries which actually underwent rapid institutional transformation over time, and how the Schengen area policy changed vis-a-vis with respect to these countries.
Well, thanks. That is a great question, and we indeed look forward to presenting some narratives as to how institutional changes that occurred in a short period of time have affected visa rules. And the anecdotal evidence we have so far indicates that democratization adversely affects the admissibility of people from a given country to Schengen or US and whatnot. And this is a very kind of clearly pronounced effect. For example, it's much more difficult now for Ukrainians to get a visa when they travel abroad as a result of all of these changes. That might be an outcome of the perception that there is an upheaval back in Ukraine, and therefore it's more likely that people will be seeking opportunities to get employed or stay abroad, but not. But market reforms, democratizations, at least in the short run, usually have an adverse effect on these admissibilities. It's much easier to get a visa from someone who travels from a well-established, rule of law-based authoritarian country than from a country which is undergoing a process of democratic transition. And I think there is some cynicism in that situation because on the one hand, the rich part of the world encourages these reforms, but at the same time, make it more difficult for those who want to follow that path to enjoy the privileges of travel to that part of the world.
Thank you. Any other questions left? No? Okay, thank you so much. And then we move for the last presentation.